Welcome to our journey of transformation. We're going to continue our studies of the parables, conversations, and principles of Jesus that teach us how to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And now we're going to be considering a confrontation that the disciples had with the Samaritans, their neighbors. We're going to be reading from Luke chapter 9, verse 51 to 56. So read with me. From Luke chapter 9, verse 51 to 56. This is where Luke says, "As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead, who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him, because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they said, 'Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?' But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and his disciples went to another village." Impulsiveness can be an imposing obstacle to loving our neighbors. The assumptions we draw, the judgments we make, and the negativity we express about our neighbors are often first reactions to situations without careful thinking. Failing to consider the context in which people live and the unique experiences that they've had, we build walls before we have even taken the time to engage with them, especially those who are different from us. As disciples of Jesus, we are training ourselves to think and act in entirely new ways compared to how we used to behave. Our goal is to practice gentleness, mercy, compassion, and patience as new habits. But while we are still in the process of training, these qualities must compete against the old impulsive habitual reactions of selfishness, anger, aggression, and retaliation. Sometimes we also become lazy with our training, thinking that we are on the brink of winning the battles against our old selves, and then suddenly a new situation surprises us. We were not prepared. A companion at work, for instance, leaves us with a huge task and goes home. New neighbors move into the house next door and start playing loud music until the early hours of the morning. A loved one, facing her own challenges, becomes irritable and easily explodes with anger at the least provocation. In such moments, we feel our old selves rushing back to defend us. If we do not take the time to carefully and prayerfully think about how to react, then our habitual impulsive reactions overcome us. When these experiences happen, we should not be discouraged. They are part of our training. They are wake-up calls, reminding us to persevere, keep working, keep practicing, and not to become lazy or complacent. Some of Jesus' disciples had a wake-up call when they arrived at a village in Samaria looking for a place to spend the night. They had already learned a lot from Jesus. During the first part of their training, a surprising reality about the Samaritans confronted them. They had thought that these people, whom they had viewed as the enemies of the Jews, were incapable of understanding God. But after Jesus spoke with the Samaritan woman at the well in Sychar, many Samaritans became devoted followers of Jesus as the Messiah. Furthermore, Jesus had to spend much time teaching the disciples about the beauty of humility. Humility is just as essential in the kingdom of God as unconditional love. But because of their personalities and backgrounds, humility was a difficult lesson to learn. Some of them had been aggressive, hard-working fishermen before leaving their nets to follow Jesus. Jesus even called two of them, James and his brother John, the sons of thunder because of their over-the-top personalities. Another one had been a political rebel, and still another had a severe problem with greed. Their habit was to argue about which of them was greater, more powerful, and more deserving of privileges. In fact, in the verses right before our reading in Luke chapter 9, Jesus had to resolve an argument between them about who was the greatest among them. Jesus chose such men to make up the 12 apostles, not because they were perfect, but because they all shared a deep faith in God's kingdom. They understood that they had a lot to change in themselves. But part of the problem of pride is to think too quickly that we have things under control and mastered. Transformation is a process, and we need an experience to shake us up and show us sometimes that we still have much to work on. Such a moment came when Jesus and the 12 came to this Samaritan village. They were traveling from Galilee to Jerusalem, which required them to pass through the territory of the Samaritans. We already know some details about the poor relations between the Jews and the Samaritans from our previous discussion of Jesus' talk with a woman at the well. Before they arrived, Jesus sent messengers ahead to look for a place to spend the night. They made up a fairly large group of people, so it was wise to make preparations for their accommodations. We do not know the details of what happened, but when the representatives entered the village, the Samaritans made it clear that they did not want Jesus and his companions to spend the night. The group was headed for Jerusalem, so it was obvious they were Jews. These Samaritans did not want Jews to spend even one night in their village. Why did the people of the village refuse the disciples? Did the villagers have a history of bad experiences with Jews? Or did Jesus' messengers approach the villagers with a demanding, impatient attitude? We don't know. What we do know is that when James and John witnessed this rejection, they took it very personally. Maybe they had already assumed they would have problems with the Samaritans and had prepared for battle. Maybe they were tired from the long walk during the day and had little energy to control their emotions. Whatever the reason was, the offensive response of the Samaritans caught them by surprise, and they fell back to their former habitual, impulsive way of responding that had trained them to be sons of thunder. Their sudden fury against the Samaritans ended in asking Jesus if they could call fire down from heaven to consume the village. Incredible. Almost to the point of comical, but it was not meant to be funny. James and John were serious. They were suddenly seriously out of control and consumed by the fire of their own emotions. Their experience is an impressive example to us about how quickly the old behavior can burst out. Jesus had talked with the disciples many times about humility. But in the emotions of the moment, none of that came back to these brothers' memories. It is also an example of how our emotions can take control of our reason. In anger, we say things that really do not make sense. Why call fire down from heaven against someone who will not rent us a bed for the night? It is no wonder we need to leave vengeance for the Lord. Our sense of justice is too erratic, too exaggerated. Jesus dealt with the matter quickly and efficiently. He was probably more embarrassed by the behavior of his followers than he was offended by the Samaritans. First, he turned to face James and John and rebuked them. He corrected them with calm but forceful words that had the power to immediately restrain their attitudes and clear their thinking. Did they remember who they wanted to become? Did they remember what they had learned so far? Focus. Think about the kingdom of God and storing up treasure in heaven. Remember humility, gentleness, peace, unconditional love. Next, Jesus told the group that they would simply find another place to spend the night. No worries, no reason to be angry. This was a brilliant teaching moment about pursuing peace. Jesus had taught them in the Sermon on the Mount that peacemakers will be called children of God. God is the God of peace. He has profoundly sacrificed himself to have peace with us and to teach us the ways of peace. Peace is much more important than having a comfortable place to spend the night. Living in peace with everyone is much more valuable than defending ourselves against every offense. Peace is not about being weak or allowing people to walk on us. Instead, it is about making conscious, thoughtful decisions not to engage in conflicts that are meaningless. It is about being creative enough to find another way to solve problems that brings peace. Peace can be difficult and costly because of the effort and sacrifice involved, but it is extremely valuable. It ought to identify who we are as disciples of Jesus. Jesus simply went another way. They had lost the chance to negotiate peace. If the Samaritans had heard the response from James and John, or if they had seen anger in the faces of the followers of Jesus, there was no reason for more conversation. They had lost the chance to explain to the people of the village that they were traveling with a Messiah who was the Prince of Peace, and he needed a place to rest for the night. They lost their credibility. They just gave the Samaritans reason to believe their stereotypes of the Jews were correct. What if the people of this village had really been quite similar in mentality to the people of Sychar who accepted Jesus? What if they too had been looking for the Messiah? What if the messengers had entered the village with attitudes of gentleness, humility, and mercy with the intention of showing the villagers the beauty of life in the kingdom? It could have been a perfect occasion for the disciples to learn to love the Samaritans as their neighbors unconditionally. Too late now to think about what ifs. Let it just be a wake-up call. Hopefully the memory of the experience would always serve to remind them to have the patience to think carefully before reacting, to think to whom they belong and who do they want to be. Now let's think about the qualities of love and how they were manifested or should have been manifested in this confrontation. First of all, humility. Remember, humility is to lower ourselves, for example, by admitting our mistakes, serving the needs of others first, and recognizing, like a child, one's smallness, weakness, dependence on others, and need to learn. How should the disciples have practiced humility? They should have humbly accepted the refusal of lodging without needing to defend their pride and prove their superiority. Humility gives us the power to choose to ignore offensive behavior. Should have been peace, too, to be in agreement and harmony without conflict. How should the disciples have practiced peace? They should have simply turned away to find another place to stay, as Jesus later did. Retaliation would solve nothing and would actually damage their credibility as followers of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Then there's patience. Patience is to hold back negative emotions, to tolerate, to wait, and not give up. How should the disciples have practiced patience? They should have held back their anger and replaced it with compassion for the Samaritans, who did not understand who Jesus was. The Samaritans may have been fighting their own personal battles, too. Compassion energizes patience. Then there's gentleness. Gentleness is to treat others with tenderness instead of severity, not wanting to cause harm. And Jesus practiced gentleness. He reacted with calm to the rejection of the Samaritans, while also correcting the attitude of the disciples with the least amount of severity necessary. There's unconditional love, too. It's to care for the welfare of another person without expecting anything in return or thinking about whether the person deserves our care. How did Jesus practice unconditional love? He refused to pay back evil for evil. His care for people did not depend on their actions towards him. There's forgiveness, too. It's to disregard an offense and treat the offensive person as if the offense never occurred. How did Jesus practice forgiveness? He treated the Samaritans as if the offensive rejection had never occurred, and he went to another village. This experience would not influence his view of the Samaritans in the future. There's also goodness. Goodness to live a beneficial life, to bring benefit to others. How should the disciples have practiced goodness? Our lives ought to be beneficial to others, not destructive, even to our enemies. Beneficial to our enemies. With this principle in mind, the disciples should have reacted with self-control and patience in order to show the Samaritans the beauty of transformed hearts and lives as followers of Jesus. So now, it's our turn to create practice and go and do likewise. So, think about a conflict you have with someone. How will you practice humility, compassion, and patience to listen and then to find a solution that satisfies everyone? Imagine having a conflict with somebody who is not willing to talk or negotiate. What are some other ways to solve the problem? And when someone is offensive toward you, what can you think about or do in order not to feel offended? And then, what are some of your impulsive reactions to difficult people that you would like to change? And what are some healthy behaviors you would like to practice to replace those impulsive reactions? A lot to think about. But as you learn to love your neighbor as you love yourself, following the model of Jesus, may the Lord bless you.